Good morning, class. Today we're going to go over our last poem in our poem analysis. This poem is by Ted Kooser, who was born in Iowa in 1939. I'll just read it off over here. He was a prolific author, writing poetry, nonfiction, children's books, and chapbooks. I don't know what chapbooks are, so maybe we could Google it and find out. He had spent 2 terms as a U.S. Poet Laureate, and Kooser teaches poetry and nonfiction at the University of Nebraska. And in Abandoned Farmhouse, he describes the aftermath of a household that has experienced traumatic events. Let's push that off to the side there. Okay, so here we go. Here's our poem. It's pretty big, so I didn't put it in our slides. Abandoned Farmhouse by Ted Kooser. He was a big man, says the size of his shoes, on a pile of broken dishes by the house. A tall man, too, says the length of the bed, in an upstairs room, and a good, God-fearing man, says the Bible with a broken back. On the floor below the window, dusty with sun, but not a man for farming, says the field, cluttered with boulders, and the leaky barn. A woman lived with him, says the bedroom wallpapered with lilacs, and the kitchen shelves covered with oilcloth. And they had a child, says the sandbox, made from a tractor tire. Money was scarce, says the jar of plum preserves, and canned tomatoes sealed in the cellar hole. And the winter's cold, says the rags in the window frames. It was lonely here, says the narrow country road. Something went wrong, says the empty house, in the weed-choked yard. Stones in the fields, says he's not a farmer. The steel-sealed jars in the cellar, says she left in a nervous haste. And the child, its toys are strewn in the yard, like branches after a storm. A rubber cow, a rusty tractor with a broken plow, a doll in overalls. Something went wrong, they said. Or they say. Okay. So this poem is kind of depressing, but it gives us a really good idea of what, some alliteration and similes and personification that could happen in a poem. So in your first reading, you should have written down 3 details that tell about each subject from the poem. Now, the ones that I'm putting down here are not all of them, so maybe you came up with something different, and that's okay. So here's the man. He was big, according to the shoes. He was tall, according to the bed. He was a God-fearing man, according to the Bible, and he wasn't a good farmer. Okay, the child. Okay, the child has a sandbox, toys strewn all over the yard, a doll in overalls. So, back when this was written, children, mostly only girls, played with dolls, so that's why we can assume that the child is a girl. Whereas now, everybody plays with dolls. Okay, our next one is woman. Oh, the bedroom walls were papered. Maybe that means that she, liked having the house look nice. The kitchen shelves covered in oilcloth. You can think of that as, a lot of people still use oilcloth nowadays. But people also use it to cover the shelves, so when they put food and stuff away, it doesn't ruin the paint. And we know that she's the mother of the little girl. And our last one is Farmhouse. rags in the window frames because, you know, it was a broken down house. And there was a narrow country road that leads up to it. So that means that the farmhouse was kind of in the middle of, not like nowhere, but it could be very far from someplace. And you have to go up a narrow meaning small road to get there. Okay, so now you should have had read it a second time, and we're going to go over some figurative language. And we were going over figurative language before we left, so this isn't anything new. And we needed to find some figurative language examples throughout this poem. And like the last reading, you're might have something different than mine, so that's okay, so long as it's personification, a simile, and alliteration. So a personification, remember, is when we give an inanimate object a human trait. So for example, he was a big man, says the size of his shoes. So do shoes talk? No, they don't talk. So we're giving the shoes a human action or trait, and the action is talking. Okay. Our next one is a simile. We're using a comparison, using a like or as. And the child, its toys are strewn in the yard like branches after the storm. So that means the toys were like thrown all over the place. Especially recently, we know what a storm looks like. You know, after it's been raining and windy, you go outside and you can see like branches and leaves and sometimes even trees all over the place. So that's how you can kind of imagine what the toys were like. Okay, and alliteration is the repetition of a constant sound. Says the size of his shoes. So it's S. Says size shoes. Okay, here's our last one. So what happened at the house? Well, they don't tell us exactly what happened at the house, but what we do know that something sudden and traumatic happened at the farmhouse. So we know it's sudden because the woman, let's see, if we go back and we look at it, so it says, the steel sealed jars, and the seller says she left in a nervous haste. So the woman they took off fast. And the child didn't have enough time to pick up its toys. So that something that happened must have been fast. So they had to leave fast. So what kind of event is Kooser trying to portray? Well, we don't really know, but we know that Kooser is portraying a sad and desperate event. Explain how Ted Kooser portrays the aftermath of a traumatic event in the poem Abandoned Farmhouse. So obviously you're not going to have something exactly the same as mine, but it'll be, so long as it's similar, it's okay. So you're not going to see all of it because I kind of accidentally, oh wait, maybe if I do this. There we go. Okay. In Ted Kooser's poem, Abandoned Farmhouse, he describes the aftermath of a traumatic event. Kooser portrays the aftermath of a disturbing event with word choices and figurative language. Remember, figurative language, show not tell. In the poem, he includes simile, and the child, its toys are strewn in the yard like branches after a storm. This simile not only paints a picture of the randomness of the toy's placement, but also gives the impression that there was some kind of chaos or traumatic event. When Kooser writes, something went wrong, says the empty house in the weed-choked yard, he implies that there was a traumatic event. He used the words wrong, empty, and choked to give a feeling of sadness and desperation. Therefore, word choice and figurative language, Kooser portrays the aftermath of a traumatic event in the poem. So remember, everything, all the reading and the questions that I have you guys answer leads up to the last question for you guys to analyze what happens. Okay. I hope you guys like this poem. It seems a pretty good one. It's more easier to understand than a lot of the other ones that we've been reading. But okay, have a good day.